pandemic trapped a bunch of aging role-playing gamers in their homes, forcing them to crawl out of their pen and paper comfort zone and into the online world of virtual tabletops and video calls. So join them as they raise the curtain to share their stories, insights, and love of all things geek. So grab your graying dice bag and get ready for another episode of Advanced Age Role-Playing Gamers Podcast.
All right, so we've worked through some of the shift mechanics, and we've sort of gone through a single day with our adventurers. Kind of where we left off was the evening. So I wanted to go ahead and now take a look at encounters, but there are a few twists and changes that come with playing solo encounters. So let's go ahead and walk through the mechanics, and I'll try to explain some of the regular encounter mechanics and how they're mixed in with solo rules. All right, so the procedure for doing your solo encounters is pretty close, pretty much the same as regular encounters. So if you see on the left there, it's kind of got a list of things that you do for each encounter sort of stage. So the first thing we're going to do is roll for a weather change. And on the right there, we've got the weather rules. Basically, when you start a game, the GM can basically set what the weather is. Otherwise, it's sort of default. It's sort of clear weather. And it's just a D6 at the beginning of every shift. And if you roll basically a 1 or the little explosion marker, it's going to move down, sort of get worse. So you're going to go from fair weather to cloudy to either like rain, heavy rain, snow, depending on what season it is. Or if you get a 6 or the little crosshair, you're going to move to a better weather state. So maybe it's been raining, it kind of clears up, or it clears up completely and you're back to fair weather. And so that happens every shift. I would also say maybe that depending on the GM, might say that this, they could set their own time frame. Like if the GM wants to build and say, well, there's a blizzard that's going to last for like 2 days. Well, that's just how it is. The weather's not going to change. But if you're completely going random, then you could have these sort of weather swings back and forth, which is completely plausible, especially with, I'm sure, how wonderful our environment's going to be after all we drop all those nukes. Sort of the next way, so to generate encounters in Twilight 2000 is all done by basically pulling cards. So in the traditional multiplayer way, there's a few other tables, and you pull a card, and based on the card you pull, it's going to have an encounter, a possible encounter, and it's going to have different conditions that encounter needs to meet for it to be viable. If it's not viable, you just don't have an encounter. In the solo rules, they sort of they expanded the encounter type table, and that's what you see down here on the bottom right. I did look and see in the rules, there doesn't appear to be a set, like pick one for each of these, and then you put all those together. I tried running a few random draws, and they didn't always come out with like a coherent string. It's not like, well, here's a place, here's a time of day, here's an opponent, here's, a condition. And so you can use this table pretty much any way you want to sort of generate a more random set of encounters than the stock that comes in the Game Master's Manual. All right, so what we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and roll for weather. So helping me out today with this is I'm using the tabletop simulator for both my dice rolling and for some of the card drawing that we'll be doing later. So let's go ahead and roll a single-sided, 6-sided die. And we got a 2, so that's neither a critical, sort of a fail or a success. So there's no change in weather. So we're just going to say it's fair weather. It was fair weather when they went to bed. So no real modifiers there. And we'll move on to the next set. So that's basically how you begin your encounters, right? You're going to roll for weather. You're going to assign and resolve a task for each PC. You're going to draw an encounter card. And if it's triggered, you're going to roll and see whether the PCs can avoid it or not. Now, we already know from the first part of this that at night their scout had failed their check. So there's not going to be a way for the group to avoid any encounter that might occur this evening. Okay, well, let's go to the next section. All right, so one thing when you're using the encounter table and some of the other mechanics here is sort of an encounter scale, helpful or hazardous. And you can see the table on the left there is directly from the rule book, and just sort of my own take on it over here on the right. So when you pull something, you can say, okay, well, is this, I'm meeting a stranger on the road, and then you can flip a card and go, well, if I get like a 2 of hearts or a 2 of clubs, it's pretty much neutral, right? So anything could happen. But maybe you roll a king of hearts, and this person's got something willing to trade that maybe you've been really looking for. Maybe they've got extra food, something that's going to be helpful to you. Or maybe it's really bad. Maybe they're really a marauder, or maybe they're going to pretend to be nice, but they're really, going to try to steal your stuff. And so this gives you a sort of a sense of scale, whether this encounter is going to be good or bad. And you can use it even to change up some of the regular ones. Like, you pull up a troll, maybe it's Russians, but maybe you pull like a really high card, and maybe this is going to be like a king of hearts, and it's not going to be, maybe they don't want to fight. Maybe they're looking for, someone to share a fire with or something. And so what might seem like a bad encounter turns good. So that's helpful in solo play. It's a really cool mechanic they have called hidden motive. So normally when you pull an encounter card, you're pulling a single card in regular multiplayer. Using the hidden motive, you pull your card, but then you pull a second one, but don't turn it over. This is their hidden motive. And so this is where it gets into, and you can see on the left, the rules is, even if you pull a card that might seem to be helpful or described as helpful, if you were to pull either a face card of either spade or club, that's actually, that hidden motive is bad, right? There's someone, like I said, like the old man you meet on the road who might share some food with you. Either he's got, he's infected with some sort of infectious disease, or when you're sleeping, he's going to try to murder you or something terrible. And so this is kind of a cool way when you're playing solo to kind of keep yourself at suspense, right? It's hard when you're playing on your own to be surprised. You pick the card, you have the encounter, you have to role play it out. But by using these hidden motives, you can sort of play through an encounter, and then at some point, any point you want, flip the other card and sort of have to deal with potentially this encounter going good, going bad, or staying the way it was. So it's a really neat mechanic. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to run through 3 encounters, scenarios, and we'll walk through each of them and sort of say, okay, well, this is what they drew. This is what the encounter was. And then we will kind of flip over the hidden motive and see, okay, what this might mean in this encounter. Okay. So, all right, we're going to go for the first one. And, okay, let's pull our cards. All right. So in this one, we got a King of Hearts. All right, so the King of Hearts. So on all of the encounter cards, and this is true for multiplayer, you're going to get the name of the encounter, and there's also a description and some other information. But the most important thing are the icons that are underneath of the name of the encounter, because this is going to tell you whether this is a viable encounter or not. And again, if you pull an encounter that's not viable, it just means that there was no encounter. And that's okay. So the very first symbol is a road, right? So these are encounters that occur while you're on road, not off-road. Off-road is like a tree, and sometimes you can have both. So the first one, they're camped out. They're not on the road. So you go, okay, well, this is not viable so far. The next icon you have there is a sun, which means daytime. So there's a sun and there's a moon, and sometimes you'll have both. So you get to the second icon, and you're like, well, this only happens during the day. I'm rolling at night, so this isn't viable. The third icon is like a little campfire. So these are stationary encounters. So these are if your group is not moving, if they're not traveling, if they're stationary, either in camp or they are in maybe their base, like they've set up a base camp. And so because they are at camp, and most of them are sleeping, this is a viable encounter. Okay. And so we have this sort of group of Russian prisoners. The prisoners are being herded by Russians, the Soviets. And so the players are going to have to deal with this. And so because the players didn't succeed at their recon, then, sort of as a solo GM, what does this mean? Does this mean that this group sort of walks itself, right into the camp by mistake? They're pushing them through, or, as they're going through, somebody in the camp makes some noise, or maybe they forgot to, put out the fire and they're noticed. And so clearly, and when you look at the second roll, you can see there's no real change, right? So this is going to be what it's going to be. So as a GM, now you've got this sort of scenario that you're running for your players, right? So that's the first one. Okay, so let's take a look at a second encounter scenario. All right, so let's go ahead and pull our cards. All right, so in this one, we've gotten a 3 of hearts, which is human's best friend. This one can occur on-road, off-road, day or night, or stationary. So pretty much any time you're playing, this can occur. And it's basically a wild dog starts following the PCs. If they attack it, it'll run off, but come back later. But pretty much, this is kind of a good encounter, and the players end up, if they don't mind, having an extra mouth to feed, sort of like our group did with Kurwa. You end up getting a little companion who might help or even fight for you or with the group. So this is a really great encounter. But if we look at our hidden motive card, we've got a face card of one of the opposite suits. So what does that mean? So, the dog appears friendly, but maybe it bites, or maybe it is carrying fleas, or it's got a disease and it's sick. Maybe it's got rabies, but it hasn't started to show yet. So unfortunately for the group, there is something very negative and bad about this dog that they've adopted. And so as a GM, you can work that into the story, So here's an example of where sort of the hidden motive flips from what could be a good encounter to something that could be a bad encounter. All right, let's go to our third scenario. We'll go ahead and flip over our cards. Okay, we're either very determined to have an encounter with prisoners, or tabletop is a terrible shuffler. All right, so our third encounter is also prisoner blues. So we already talked about this in the first encounter. Let's go ahead and flip over our hidden motive. Okay, so in this scenario, we get a hidden motive card that's a face value of one of the 2 positive sets. So now we're thrown in with an encounter where we have these Soviet soldiers, and they're moving a group of prisoners. And so perhaps the party is worried, they're shocked, they've been noticed. You've got these Soviet troops out there. But because of this face card, maybe you've got a scenario where maybe these Soviet soldiers have actually defected, or maybe they've decided this is enough, and they're tired of, trying to take care of these people, and they're looking to pawn them off on somebody. Or perhaps maybe someone within that group has a skill that is much needed, and those soldiers are willing to trade supplies to allow maybe like a doctor or somebody to work on one of the players. So something good is going to happen, or something beneficial will happen with this encounter, where at first maybe it might be seen as something threatening. So these are some of the ways that by pulling the hidden motive card, and you know what? This is designed and put in the solo play. This is probably not a bad mechanic, even in regular standard multi-person play. It might be kind of fun when having these encounters to pull these. And, it's a good design to both sort of shock and keep the players on their toes. And it's also good for GMs to keep themselves on the toes, because they might be like, oh, okay, here's a patrol of Soviets. Let's get out the dice, let's roll. But maybe flipping this card over, once negotiations start or once they notice each other, really can kind of like also make it exciting for the GM, because they don't know everything that's happening. And so that's kind of a cool way that maybe you could take some of the solo play rules and incorporate them into a standard multiplayer game. All right, so we've looked at sort of the rules for solo play when it comes for encounters, right? Sort of the big thing is they've got expanded encounter generation tables. But really one of the cool mechanics that I wanted to focus on today was sort of that hidden motive, because I think that's a really cool way to keep yourself as either a solo player or, quite frankly, as a GM, kind of on your toes and adding an additional sort of sense of unknown and tension in your game, and which definitely a game like Twilight 2000 that fits very well in. I just wanted to throw a few links that I had found when searching. They're not really an endorsement for these sites, or they don't endorse or associate with us. But I had just done a quick Google search on Twilight 2000 solo play. I have found a few others on the official Twilight 2000 Discord channel that also talk about and post their solo play. It is pretty amazing to see some of the details and the journaling that folks will do. It's pretty cool to see how they've really laid out an entire storyline playing through solo play. All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope this has been informational. I think this is a really great system for solo play. If you've got any questions when this comes out, please leave them in any of the comment sections you've got. Until next time, be kind to each other, stay safe, and play games.